Welcome to the Link Online. And we're back once again to bring you another show of stories in Canada, about Canada, and from Canada, and of course Canadian viewpoints on world affairs. And we'd like to say hello to our listeners on World Radio Paris. Bonjour to you, and also on the shortwave service from Germany. Guten Tag. Guten Tag, yes, or Guten Abend, because, it could be evening, right? Whatever.
Guten Morgen.
Guten Morgen could be that as well. Yeah. And in Nigeria, we have our friends at Kauri 97.5 FM radio there. And of course, we have, as I mentioned, all these stories from Canada and a lot of interesting things as well. We have someone new on our team today. Vincenzo Morello joins us.
Hello. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, well, okay. Even though he is a Colorado fan, Colorado Avalanche, we've allowed him to stay. We'll try to, correct his...
I mean, Colorado is former Quebec Nordiques. It's still the same province.
Colorado.
Dream on.
I think I just made it worse.
Anyway, we'll soon straighten him out. In our control room today, we have Pierre-Luc Blais and Marc-André Deschamps controlling things and wondering most of the time what we're doing. And of course, directing it all is the man upstairs, Commander Dutil. We salute him because he has the keys to the cabinet, the pencils and stuff that we need.
And a lot of other things.
A lot of other things as well. All right, coming up on the program today, Levon, we're going to give you, first of all, a chance to promo your series once again.
Oh my God, my series, podcast series. By the way, you can listen to this very program as a podcast. But I worked for 2 weeks. I worked on a podcast series called Diplomatic Dispatch, and it's about Canadian foreign policy. And if you're interested, about Canada, Canadian foreign policy, what Canada should do internationally, the big questions, check it out. It's available on Apple, Google, Android, or other, your favorite podcast app. And I hope it's fun to listen. And I'm really curious what you think about it. Love to get some of your feedback. And there it is.
And of course, if you go to the website, you can download the Rci App right on the side of the banner.
And you can
there
listen to the podcast from the app itself, so you don't even have to download it as a podcast if you don't know how to do it.
And of course, the show is on Facebook Live right now and the RCI YouTube channel, and you can pick that up later if you miss this broadcast right now live. All right, so that's what about the story today then, Levon?
So of course, it's the big story internationally. It's the coronavirus. And I'll speak about Canada's efforts to repatriate some of its citizens who are stuck in the city of Wuhan, or the province of Hubei, which is the epicenter of this global outbreak.
All right. And Vincenzo, what do you have for us today?
There was a survey by Marshall Pell. They're like a tech human resources company. They surveyed Canadians, and 3 out of 4 Canadians say they would rather have better mental health support and take a lower pay.
That's the stress levels at work you're talking about.
Yeah. It's weird. Usually pay is the number one priority for Canadian workers, but apparently not anymore. So, yeah.
All right. And in my story today, Huawei and cybersecurity comes up once again, as Britain has announced that it will allow Huawei partial access to developing their 5G network. Those are some of the stories coming up on the program today. And Levon, we're going to start out with you once again. Now, the World Health Organization, as we know, has declared the outbreak of the coronavirus, the Wuhan novel virus, number 9, I think it's called, or something, officially. They finally declared that as a global health emergency, and countries around the world are scrambling to respond to this. Potentially, it actually is deadly because there's been about 160 deaths so far.
More than that. It just today, as of Friday, Chinese authorities confirmed 213 deaths. That's 40. That's a jump of 43 new fatalities. So it's a very, very complex situation.
But there's none outside of China at this point, is there?
At this point, no. Okay. There's like 10,000 people infected globally, but the absolute majority, almost 98%, if not more, are in China, and most of them are in the central province of Hubei, and the largest city there is Wuhan, and that's where this new virus took its name from. China says about 9,692 cases so far in China, and as I said, 213 fatalities. The United States and Japan have airlifted hundreds of their citizens from China. The European Union is looking into airlifting about 600 Europeans from China. And we also found out that Canada is also at the kind of the forefront of these efforts to bring its citizens back. On Wednesday, Foreign Affairs Minister François-Philippe Champagne and Federal Health Minister Patty Hajdu held a joint press conference and announced that Canada has chartered a passenger jet, a chartered airline that specializes in this kind of emergency evacuations to bring back Canadians. There's about and the figures change every day, but there's about 250 Canadians who have registered with Canadian authorities in Hubei, and about 196 to date have expressed a desire to come back to China, to Canada. Mm-hmm. The problem is that China has imposed a lockdown on the entire province of Hubei. So this is 50 million people, has more than the population of Canada. And so Foreign Minister François-Philippe Champagne talked about some of the challenges of bringing these people back to Canada.
Once you have secured an airplane, which what we did yesterday, and I was in touch even with the CEO of the company, so the plane is secured. Now that's step one. After that, obviously in parallel to that, we need to work with the Chinese authorities with respect to the authorizations you need to bring the plane, obviously in China, but also work on the logistics. Canadians understand, and once you have a plane that you could repatriate Canadians, those who wish to be repatriated, then we need to work on the logistics because, as you know, the city is on lockdown. So we are talking. I just finished a call with the Minister of International Relations of Quebec. I just literally finished a call with Secretary Raab of the United Kingdom. We are all coordinating. We're all talking to each other to make sure that, as Minister Hajdu said, we learn from best practices. We are coordinating, and we'll come back to you as soon as we have more to say with respect to the next steps. Now we're working together.
And that was Foreign Affairs Minister François-Philippe Champagne. But it's not just logistics of getting people out of China that are daunting. The question is, what do you do with these people once they arrive in Canada? One of the ideas that's being floated around was quarantining all these people at a military base where they will be basically followed up by medical authorities until they're given a clean bill of health. The scientists have figured out that this disease has a kind of a sleep period of about
dormant period.
2 weeks. That and once you're clear this 2 weeks and you're not showing any symptoms, then you're clear to go. And so Health Minister Patty Hajdu was asked about this.
The first and foremost thing to remember is that we will always work to ensure the health of Canadians, whether they're abroad or whether they're here. So yes, what we're looking at is a scenario where we have all the measures in place to protect Canadians from exposure to the virus. And having said that, that's about as far as I can go, because we know that, for example, the U.S. has a process that's working very efficiently, and that is working in a very similar way that we're working on the virus in our domestic approach. So we'll come back to you with the steps as we develop them further.
So, a typical politician's answer. And also, to be fair, you can see that they're improvising as they go because, this is an unprecedented epidemic. Even it has now eclipsed what Canada dealt with during the SARS outbreak. Reporters kept her pressing and saying, what does it mean? Will people who are sick be allowed to board the plane? Because I think it was the Japanese flight that had a couple of people on, coughs and sniffles. And the problem is that, this virus, it's a flu-like virus. So you might have a flu the symptoms are very, very similar. So here's what she had to say again.
So in terms of the questions around the processes, I will not speculate at this point what exact process will be in place, other than to say that the goals of the process will be to protect the health of Canadians, both here in Canada and the health of Canadians who are returning. In terms of your second question, will people be allowed to come back if they're sick? These are the conversations that we're having with our partners, including China, to determine how, in fact, people are allowed to board and what the processes are. Obviously, some people may be engaged with the medical system, and that's the hard work that Minister Champagne and his team are doing to determine what support people need. Let's remember that not everybody in China that's on the list of people that would like support want to come back to Canada. In fact, as I said yesterday, some of the concern is around supplies that they might be running out, challenges moving around the region, being separated from families that might be in another part of the region. And so Minister Champagne's team is doing a thorough job trying to understand the numbers of people that want to come back, as well as what other kinds of ways we can support Canadians in a very difficult situation where mobility has been essentially cut off from other parts of the country.
And there is another issue that has cropped up recently, and that's the fate of dual citizens. China doesn't recognize dual citizenship. So as far as Chinese authorities are concerned, many of these Canadians are Chinese nationals. So Foreign Minister Champagne will have to do some very delicate diplomatic work to convince Chinese authorities that it's probably in their best interest to allow these people out, allow, if they're sick, allow the Canadian system to deal with them and maybe alleviate some of the pressure on the Chinese health system, which has been stretched to the limit. I mean, there's incredible things that the Chinese are doing. The quarantine, they're building these enormous hospitals in 10 days.
Yeah.
We were listening to the World Health Organization's briefing when they announced the global emergency, and the head of this organization, he was just, so careful, but also
he was clear in saying, China is doing a great job. They're doing absolutely the best they can. This is absolutely not a criticism of China.
Yes.
So,
very interesting. And of course, this comes as China and Canada are, in the context of this very tense diplomatic relationship over Huawei and what Canada will do with, the extradition case and China's arrest of 2 Canadian citizens. So it's a very, very serious and complex situation.
The interesting thing, another interesting thing here in Canada that has occurred is the run on these face masks and respirators, the N95 respirator, which is a bit more sophisticated than a simple face mask like a surgical cloth thing. And you see, I've seen a few of these people walking around here and I'm going, why? The risk here is just about zero. And yet, in places like Toronto and Vancouver, they've been selling out thousands and thousands of these face masks. And one of the suppliers at a hardware store in Toronto said he has people coming in of Chinese descent buying cases of these things, and they're sending them over to China.
Yeah.
So,
and the funny thing is, most of these masks are produced in China. So China is really running out of supplies of this face mask. And on Friday morning, they sent out a request requesting equipment, because even a huge healthcare system like the Chinese healthcare system is strained to the limit. They need respirators. They need all this equipment to keep medical staff safe. So a very, very interesting.
Because the medical staff can't go into a situation like that just with a little face mask. They have complete, I guess you'd call them hazmat suits.
Yeah, it's the stuff that you see them dealing with the Ebola virus.
Exactly, yeah. And they have that here. I was talking to someone at a local hospital, and they were saying, we've got these people dressed up with the face masks and the respirators and the suits and negative pressure hospital rooms to put anybody with a problem goes into a negative pressure hospital room to prevent the germs from virus getting out into the. So it's all very, very complex, very expensive, very involved, And but because of the SARS virus we had several years ago, there's a lot better understanding of how to deal with these kind of situations.
Yes, and some of the social dynamics, because dealing with the virus is one thing, dealing with all those social issues that come with the fear, the panic,
the misinformation or the disinformation.
And imagine, I mean, now this the SARS virus, social media was in its infancy during the SARS virus. Even now, you're having an epidemic where everybody can spread disinformation. So a lot of people are talking about the virus of misinformation.
Oh, it's pretty bizarre. I was watching a show today, a news show, and they were saying there's this misinformation saying if you eat these Chinese noodles, you'll get it. Like, come on, But it's amazing how people don't think and don't search out things. They just accept these things for what they are at face value. I'm just always shocked by that. I mean, do you see that? And
you just got to be careful. Not everything you read on the internet is true, and I know that seems like such a like obvious thing to say, but you go on Twitter sometimes and you see a bunch of tweets and you see a bunch of retweets and people engaging with misinformation, and sometimes it looks credible, but you just have to really stick to like primary news sources or like national news sources to make sure that the information you're getting is actually accurate. Like the whole story earlier this week saying that the virus was stolen out of Winnipeg, like.
Yeah,
how does that happen?
Well, it's people who decide, or they're seeking attention. It's a joke that people don't even realize that how bad this could turn out, and.
Yeah, it's like somebody going into a theater and screaming fire, as a joke. Well, it's not funny, And besides the people who simply are uninformed and are retweeting stuff because they think they're doing something good, there are those who, like you say, are deliberately using their skills to create fake things. Like they're faking a government agency on the website, so it looks very. This was another thing of the story that I saw today was there's a very good fake of a government website promoting this misinformation, and so you say, why do people do that? I just don't understand. Anyway, let's move on to another subject, another serious subject, and we're going to be talking about 5G networks and Huawei. Well, this is something you just mentioned a moment ago, Huawei, and the concerns over that. The big deal here is the development of the 5G network and security concerns. And of course, 5G is this quantum leap over what we have now in terms of technology and the ability to carry signals and how it's all going to interconnect everything. And basically it allows for vastly more information to be carried and carried much quicker than our current systems. Now, the concern, of course, has always been that Huawei, being a Chinese company, is too closely connected with the communist government and their goals, I suppose. And the fact that maybe Huawei is creating backdoors into their systems. And so the United States, New Zealand, and Australia have said, we don't want that in our coming 5G network. We don't want Huawei involved because there's a security risk there. Well, now, I spoke to Stephanie Carvin. She's an assistant professor at the Norman Pattison School of International Affairs at Carleton University in Ottawa, and she says security really shouldn't be the only, or perhaps even the main concern, as China has shown clearly that it doesn't really need Huawei equipment to steal things, whether it's state secrets or other secrets, industrial secrets, and so on. And also that it's perfectly willing to use its economic clout and other means to intimidate other countries and promote and protect Huawei against any restrictions or legal charges. So in this excerpt, I asked her first, though, why Britain, which is one of the Five Eyes, the security network involving Canada, the US, New Zealand, and Australia, why would Britain allow Huawei partial access to developing their 5G network?
Basically, what what they've said is you're only going to allow any system to have up to 35% of Huawei products. So it's taking what I would call a regulatory approach. So really, we've seen countries talk about banning Huawei, and we've seen countries talking about regulating Huawei. And the reason it has effectively chosen this, it says banning Huawei isn't enough to protect cybersecurity. I think there's some concern that if you just simply ban it, that somehow you're safer. That's not true. I mean, China is known to engage in widespread espionage against governments, against companies, against people. It doesn't actually need Huawei equipment to do that. So I think what they're saying is, well, look, Huawei has good equipment. It has cheap equipment. What we need to do is layer security on it. So we're going to test the equipment, so we're going to monitor the equipment, we're going to limit where it can be used, and so we're going to take this layered security approach because it's better to have Huawei and work with Huawei than it is to just simply ban it, and then China will find another way to kind of do the kind of scary technical things that we think it could do anyway.
Well, there has been no proof as of yet, as far as I know, that Huawei has built-in backdoors and so on into their systems, but supposing Huawei did come across some sensitive security information, to what extent would they want to or be obliged to hand that over to the Chinese government?
This is a great question, simply because, we often hear Huawei say things like, well, Huawei obeys the laws of the company, of the country that it's in, that Huawei actually, would never obey those kinds of orders from the Chinese government. We've heard Huawei Canada say that numerous times. I think there's a problem with that, which is that, let's say, Huawei was caught doing something illegal in Canada and we wanted to prosecute them. Well, we've seen the Chinese government act on behalf of Huawei in the sense that, we arrested the chief financial officer at the request of the United States in December 2018, the Meng Wanzhou case. And then China immediately arrests 2 Canadians on espionage charges and also then increases the sentence of 2 Canadians in jail to death sentences. So in other words, what I'm concerned with, the technical issue, I think sometimes is overstated. I think it's a risk management approach is a reasonable approach to take. My problem with Huawei is that it can circumvent the rule of law through kidnapping, through threats. And what we're seeing right now in Germany is the fact that China has basically said, unless you let Huawei into your country, we will ban all German cars. So the fact is that Huawei can say all it wants that it's going to obey the law while knowing that China is going to be more than willing to make threats on its behalf. So I don't think we should look at the Huawei issue as just a technical threat. It's a really kind of a larger geoeconomic issue that is about how you actually deal with a state championed company, particularly when that state is willing to engage in the kinds of activities that could potentially allow Huawei to skirt the rule of law.
And that is Stephanie Carvin. She's an assistant professor at the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs at Carleton University in Ottawa. And it's interesting, she mentioned a case which we really haven't heard much about in North America, which is Huawei threatening Germany, saying if you restrict, or not Huawei, rather the Chinese government, I should say, threatening Germany, saying if you restrict Huawei in Germany, we'll restrict German cars in China. We won't take your cars anymore. And China represents the biggest market for German-made vehicles. So, here you have, again, this sort of intimidation effect saying, oh, yeah, you're going to...
Well, but listen, I mean, take the Chinese side. If you look at it from the Chinese side, their company is not being allowed to participate in a market like a big multi-billion, trillion-dollar emerging market without anybody ever showing any proof that Huawei equipment has any backdoors. Mm-hmm. And they're saying, well, if you can do it to our company...
Publicly, we have to... because we don't know what's going on.
I think if there was a single case of proven a problem with Huawei, we would have heard about it by now. You would have had congressional investigations into it. I mean, they're talking so much about it without any proof. Imagine how much more you would hear about Huawei if they actually had any proof.
That's an entirely reasonable argument.
So I think if you look at it from the Chinese perspective, they'd say, listen, if you are willing to restrict our biggest company from participating in your market, why shouldn't we, go for, I don't know, if
Canadian canola or German cars.
Or German cars.
Yeah, all right. Okay, well, that's another subject. If you have any thoughts and you'd like to weigh in on this, please drop us a line here at Radio Canada International, The Link. Now, coming up, stress or money? Vincenzo, this is your story.
Yeah, so basically a recent survey by a company called Morneau Chappelle. They're basically like a technology human resources company. They surveyed Canadians, and the survey said that 3 out of 4 Canadians would prioritize their mental health services over their salary. And I spoke to Paula Allen. She's the Senior Vice President of Research, Analytics and Innovation at Morneau Chappelle, and she was saying that basically one of the contributing factors to this story is the fact that work demand has increased over the last 2 years, and she was saying that last year she was saying that because of this that more workers are facing an increased mental health stress at the workplace.
That was a very interesting finding for us. It really just says how aware employees are of the value of what employers do to support their personal well-being and in particular their mental health. And not only are they aware, but it's a factor in who they'll choose to work for. So it was a quite strong finding, and no matter how we looked at it, it was there. So people would be willing to leave their same employer for the same pay. 77% would leave for the same pay and better support. So that means it's really a clear driver, and it's not more pay. But they would also leave for less pay. So the majority said that they would leave for less pay and better support for their personal health and well-being.
So yeah, just to why do you think Canadians have responded to the survey like that?
Well, I think that there's a growing awareness that when you're working, one of the values of work is to improve your quality of life, and part of that is how much you're being paid. But also part of that is your work environment, the support that your employer gives you. In last year's survey, it was pretty clear. We found that almost 60% of employees said that their workplace was helpful to their mental health, but 25% said it was harmful. So if you're in a situation where you have an opportunity to be in an environment, to do work, to have resources that are helpful to your mental health, and you also are aware that if that's lacking, it could be harmful, then the choice becomes very clear. You are taking care of yourself, you are taking care of your quality of life, and definitely money is not the only factor.
So yeah, that was Paula Allen, the Senior Vice President of Research and Analytics and Innovation at Morneau Chappelle. Just in terms of mental health, obviously mental health today is a lot less stigmatized. 2 days ago, we had the Bell Let's Talk hashtag going around Twitter. So she was saying that as well could be a contributing factor to people being more aware of their mental health at work. And what I thought was interesting, there was a report written up by Deloitte Insights saying that it's even worth it for businesses to invest in mental health services at work because of basically the cost of not investing in mental health support can lead to less productivity and a high turnover of employees. So.
Yeah, well, as you said, people would leave gladly if there was a place that wasn't as stressful. Should we say hello to a couple of people?
Yes, we should probably say hello to Gustavo Lucas, who's listening to us from Melo in Uruguay, and Louis Caron, who's listening to us from much closer, Boucherville, just across the river from where we are. And
Bonjour, Louis.
Bonjour, Louis. And we also have Riaz Hussein, but he didn't say where he is listening from. Thank you very much for tuning in.
And now for Vincenzo Morello, Lavance Wunz, myself, Mark Montgomery, Pierre-Luc Blais, Pierre Dutil, and Marc-André Deschamps. That's it for us for today. Do take care until next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.